see it there.
Perfect. Here. Perfect. There we go. Okay, and we're just waiting for Bruce to return. We'll give him a minute here. Hopefully he remembers how to get back. Yeah, that was so weird. Every time that there's a little button that shows up on my screen that says I can go live to Facebook, and it wasn't showing up. So we'll give Bruce a minute, and if not, then we'll get started anyways. Okay. Well, while we're waiting for Bruce, maybe what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of an introduction. So welcome everybody to the Command Post. I'm Stephanie Shapiro. Oh, hang on, here we go. There's Bruce. There we go.
How are we making out, Steph?
We're good, and we are live, Bruce. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Perfect timing. So before I introduce my guest today, first of all, I want to say welcome to everybody joining us tonight. We are coming at you from the Command Post, normally Tales from the Bathroom, but we sort of evolved out of the bathroom now that COVID restrictions have eased up on us. And, now we're sitting in more comfortable seats, and I'm not dragging all my guests into the bathroom with me. So you're welcome. You're one of the few who haven't been dragged to sit in your own bathroom drinking a glass of wine. Before I introduce my guest today, I want to talk to you about the fact that today's topic is going to be Military Family Appreciation Day. We have been running a 4-week-long Military Family Appreciation Day campaign where it has been our goal to educate as many Canadians as possible that there is a Military Family Appreciation Day out there, that there are military families out there that do deserve recognition. What does a military family look like? What do their experiences look like? We spent 2 weeks working on that. And the last 2 weeks have been on a really fun, if I do say so myself, campaign. We've called it the #HomeFort Challenge, where we've invited as many Canadians as possible to build a fort in their home or in their office with their friends or families, take a picture or video of the fort, post it on their social channels, and challenge other people to do the same. And I would like to say thank you to everybody out there who has been participating in the challenge. We've had a lot of momentum so far. We've had something like over 2 million impressions. We've had some amazing numbers out there, and I really just want to highlight it for the military families. There are many more Canadians now that know about you, that are recognizing you, and that are appreciating you. So take a look we have newspaper articles coming out. We have some more photos coming up. So keep looking at our Facebook page because we have a lot of awesome content coming out. And now today, I'm going to introduce my guests. We have retired infantry major Alex Watson over in my upper left corner there. We have retired warrant officer Bruce Frampton in my lower right-hand corner there. And we have current serving, but almost retired, Colonel Angela Banville. And Angela, your retirement, you're like on the final countdown here.
Yep, on Friday. My last
Hey! Congratulations.
It's been 32 years, right?
Right, that's correct.
32 years. Good for you. So if I were you, I'd have a big like a New Year's Eve clock counting it down. So we normally, in these discussions, we normally have a military family member as a guest. So we've had spouses on, we've had mothers and fathers on, we've had children who have been moved around as a result of being a military family, but we've never actually have active or former serving members on, because usually we like the highlight to be on the family. Today, I thought we could take an opportunity to hear about some of your experiences while serving, because I think it's so important to highlight some of your stories. So many Canadians don't realize what it is that our Canadian military does for our country. And then I want to talk about sort of how it affected your own family and maybe the role that your own family played in your career. So if you would indulge me and take a few moments, why don't we start with Bruce? I'm going to pick on you first.
Absolutely, please do.
Do you want to tell us, if you wouldn't mind, tell me about your military career? If you could give us a 5-minute, I know it's been, how many years did you serve?
Yeah. How long do I have?
Right. Well, we have 45 minutes and I have a mute button and I'm not afraid to use it.
That might come in handy yet. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. I joined in 85. I did 20 of that with the battalion. I was with the PPCLI, so I'm Army of the West. My dad was Army of the West as well. He served in Korea. So I kind of grew up with that, knowing at some point that's kind of where I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to do. I didn't know if it was going to be a full-time, full-on life career, but as it turned out, that's just the way that it turned out. The evolution of my career was kind of neat because in the mid 80s when I joined, the Canadian Army, and again, when I speak, I should say that right off the front, that I'm speaking from a battalion context, an Army guy context, because that's what I was. So I'm not trying to say that every sailor went through this, everybody in the Air Force went through this, everybody in the Army went through this, but just myself. So when I joined up in the mid 80s, Canada's not actively engaged anywhere in the world. We're doing some missions into Cyprus, some smaller missions in smaller places, but as the Canadian Armed Forces, we're not engaged. So in 1988, we get the call to go into Cyprus. So that's tour number one. There's not a lot of anxiety that goes into going into Cyprus. There had been earlier on at the start of the Cyprus missions, but certainly by the time I went there, it wasn't all that. If I break it into 7 years at a time for the most part, so I take 85 to 92 in the early 90s, the Canadian military steps up and operations start stepping up, and then we start deploying into places like Africa. We go into the Balkans, and you can see the operational tempo starting to pick up, and people are being deployed more in their primary roles than they were earlier. That has an impact on the family. The slower pace, being away is being away, but being deployed is being deployed.
Can you clarify that for me? Being away is being away, and being deployed is being deployed. Clarify.
So I can be deployed nationally. I can go away for 4 months on a career course. I can go on a 5 months exercise.
Right.
Away for the family. Away is away. And correct. My wife was with me from the start of my career. In 85, we were married. So she was there at the beginning when things were fairly slow. You go off to Wainwright, you go to Shiloh, you go down to the States, you do these training exercises, you go on courses, but you're not in harm's way. Then as it picks up into the early 90s and we start hearing about genocide, we start hearing about ethnic cleansing, then the family and the press pick up the momentum of that. And it starts making national news. And people start paying attention because now we're starting to get deployed more into our traditional roles. You move ahead 7 more years, 8 more years, Afghanistan opens up. More press, more stories, more pressure on the family. The things overseas aren't as good. That starts to take a toll. It's just kind of funny that in my timeline, in my 25 years, that we started at a very slow pace where away is away, but away meant Wainwright, 2 provinces away or a province away. Then all of a sudden you're half a world away and you're being deployed to do your primary job, where the people back home fully support and try to help you with your mission as best they can. But when you're on those missions later on, you have to be very much in the game. You have to be very much connected to the here and the now. And the here and the now is when you're deployed overseas. So you spend a good portion of your time telling each other what the other person needs to hear while you're away. You have to be careful with that when it can be a slippery slope, because I'm not going to call home when I could call home, because in the early 90s, there's no internet. Who had a computer? Nobody. You're doing snail mail, and a real charm to snail mail, I must say. There was something inherently great about getting 3 letters every 3 weeks, and then you get to share with your buddies, right? Something really nice about that. You get the perfume letter, something very nice about that. Mm-hmm. As you go forward into the later 90s and the 2000s, of course, everybody's got FaceTime, everybody's online. The problem with that is everything's in real time. So a problem back home doesn't have a buffer. It is right there right now. So whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's a thing, but you're still very much have to be kept in the moment of what you're doing when you're deployed. So that's kind of who I am. We can look at some of that later, but that's kind of where I'd like to start.
Okay. I have a couple questions. Number one, you're saying away is away. Do you think that you being away for training versus you being away for deployment, do you think that put different kinds of pressure on your family, or was it just simply the fact that there was an absence?
No, and that's the whole crux of it. It did. We were kind of fortunate, myself and my wife, because when it started, we started slow. We started from a very slow pace. So she was able to build those skills of gone away for a couple of weeks, gone away for a couple of months.
Right.
But as the operational tempo picked up, by then she already had some calluses and now of course it's not just her anymore. Now I've got my both daughters. Additional challenges, I once worked with a guy and he said a real smart thing. He said to me, there's never a good time to be away. There just isn't, because when you're gone, it's going to happen. It's births to anniversaries, first steps to bar mitzvahs, and first words to last words. I mean, when you're away, that's what happens. And the people back home, they deal with it and they get it done. And depending on who your spouse is, again, I'll talk in the first person. Kim buffered most of the stuff that went wrong or went south while I was away. And we picked it up when I got back, and she would tell me more to the point what happened. I guess the exception was in '93, I had just finished my leave and I was heading back into Croatia. And the day we were flying back, I was sick. Oh my goodness, my head was matted. I had a high fever. I had stuff on my face. So I went to the base hospital and I'm like, take a look at what's going on. And it's a Saturday. So first of all, they're not all that happy to have you show up anyway. It's a weekend. And the medic or the doc looks at me, he's like, well, what do you got? And I'm like, I have no idea. He goes, well, have you had it before? And I'm like, no, I certainly haven't. He goes, well, you got it now. I'm like, okay, Mr. Dangerfield, but what is this? He goes, it doesn't matter. You're going back overseas. You got to go. So I get to the airport in Toronto, fly back over on an Air Canada flight into Germany. From there, we fly into Zagreb. I meet one of the NCOs I'm working with. He sees I'm a mess. So they take me to the MASH unit in Zagreb. The second I get off the bus, the doctor looks over and says, get a mask on that guy. He's got chicken pox.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Best dad ever. Absolutely.
Oh, no.
So the following day, I actually have access to a phone from the MASH unit. They bring it into my plastic bubble world. And I get to phone my wife and say, hey, listen, I just want to let you know, good news. I got back and I'm being looked after and everything's all right. I love the visit into the final third tour of the mission. Can't wait to see you guys again. Thank you for everything. It was wonderful. I've got chicken pox. I got to go. And then a week later, both my daughters had chicken pox. So,
oh, shame.
Right? How's that one?
Well, that's a way to, let them know the news. Alex, let's go over to you. I want to hear about your military career. It was a lengthy one that I had the privilege of listening to yesterday. So run down your resume for us.
Yeah, so I joined as an officer in 1998, and then I was an infantry officer for 13 years. I too was in the PPCLI, and I did the bulk of my career in 3rd Battalion, mostly doing in the light infantry and airborne world. So I deployed to Bosnia as a platoon commander in 2000. And then I deployed to Kandahar in southern Afghanistan in 2002, right after 9/11, again in 06, and then again in 09-10. And in 09-10, I commanded B Company through PPCLI. So I think I was in Afghanistan just under 2 years by the time the decade was done. So I didn't have kids. I didn't have a family. I had a partner at that time. And to be honest, before joining the Army, I worked in the oil patch and stuff like that. So I was never home anyway. So at the beginning, I treated being overseas just like being in the oil patch. I was just gone. And it's not until I had my son, kind of in the last year I was in the military, that I sort of learned maybe how much stress I probably put my parents through in that time. But to be honest, and this is selfish of me, I had no appreciation for that at the time. I was just pedal to the metal the whole time, and kind of just blasted through my military career. I was lucky that I had extremely supportive parents, and my partner that I was with at the time, she endured 2 tours. The first tour, she didn't even speak English. She was from Quebec, and she'd come to Alberta, and I got deployed on quite short notice, and she was kind of stranded in Alberta. And so I had very little appreciation for the struggles of the home front, to be honest. That was kind of my own selfishness. I know that when I was a company commander, I made it very clear to my guys that there are challenges on the home front, and we're not going to increase those challenges by sharing everything with the home front. I said, look, there's no reason to talk about what we did today or what happened to us today. You can talk about that when you go home. By that point, by the time I did my 4th tour, there were satellite phones all over the place. I literally remember calling my family from the back deck of an armored vehicle, I think maybe a couple hours after a gun battle. And, I didn't talk about it, and neither should I have. My family was already enduring enough stress.
So I want to come back to that. That's a really interesting point. So I want to touch on that, what you just said. But before I do, I want to just really quickly hear about Angela's 32-year career, because you are all saying some really interesting things to me that I want to kind of pull some nuggets out of there. But Angela, let's hear about your career first.
So I'm in the Air Force, 32 years as of this Friday. It's the anniversary of my first day at Chilliwack. I'm the kid of a military family. My father served for 35 before me. I met my spouse actually at basic training. Didn't start dating him there, but we started dating later. And so a little different experience because he was a military member. He served for 13 years before he was released medically. He was in the Navy. He was the one always gone. I was in Shearwater while he was in Halifax, and he was always gone. So I was the only military spouse of all of the ladies in the wardroom. So that put me in a different experience because I actually knew lots that was going on during the Gulf War about what we were doing with helicopters to get them ready to go on the ships and what ships were going and what problems were happening in theater, and spouses were interested in all of that, and I had to not be sharing all of that. While I was in Shearwater, I deployed to Alert for 6 months. Didn't have any children then. He was actually at sea 3 months before I left, and I came home 3 months after he got home. So we were away 265 days that year between us. Then we came to Ottawa, went away for 10 months on a course. When I did have children, they were 6 years old when I went to Toronto for 10 months. We moved to Germany. That was the first time he had to quit his career to follow me. By then he was a civilian spouse. And so that's a little challenging to have to be a male spouse, to quit your career to follow your female spouse, even though everybody supports each other and stuff like that. All of a sudden you're the one home with the kids. You're the one who has no tie to the workplace anymore. He was probably one of the, out of the 17 military families we were in Ramstein, there was only 2 of us who were female. And the other one, her spouse lived in another country. She met him while she was there. And so he was the only male spouse. He used to enjoy going on the wine tours with the NATO ladies, the NATO spouses, because he was the only guy. So it was great for him. But, it does offer other challenges too, because he doesn't have a peer, or he doesn't have many peers, because he's not at work the way the other males are who are Canadian. And so that's kind of unique. And then the kids are, I'm an Anglophone, he's Francophone, so they went to French school here. First, when we moved to Germany, first time, they were bilingual, but first time they went to school in English. Had to kind of brief the school. Well, you mean they can't speak English? No, they can speak English fine, but they've never actually been in an English class with a teacher speaking English. They spoke in French for 4 years. So, that was a good transition for them, but it was still challenging for them. Only 3 kids in a school of 900 when they came from a school here of 120. Mm-hmm. So that was a huge difference for them. We went from there to Cold Lake, which was challenging. It was awesome for me. I was in command. It was an awesome tour, very operational. doing NATO's NORAD sovereignty, really loved my work. And then I had a spouse who took 4 months to find a job, and kids who didn't like their school at all for the first year. They were not in the clique. The other kids had been there forever, didn't want to hear about anybody who'd moved from Europe and had done some fun stuff. That was no interest to them. And the kids wanted to talk about their life, because just like all other kids. So that was challenging for them. And it was challenging for me to temper my enthusiasm about work.
Because you loved it so much.
People who weren't happy.
Right.
And then the worst thing, my husband gets a job, like I said, that fall. And it turns out to be like his favorite job. And 2.5 years later, I tell him to quit it again and move with us to Ottawa. Girl's very happy to move to Ottawa, back where the family's nearby. He quits the job, took a year to get a job here in Ottawa, even though he was on a priority referral list. So that's a challenge again. While we were in Germany, I deployed to Afghanistan, to ISAF headquarters in Kabul for 3.5 months, and then back and forth 4 more times. So about 5 months total in theater when the kids were little. It was an interesting dynamic because I was there with NATO, so we didn't have the same support that we get when we leave from Ottawa or from anywhere else in Canada, where you have a military family resource center to support you and things like that. Then when we got back here to Ottawa, I went away for 10 months again to Toronto. This time they were 16. They were 6 the last time I had went. Different challenges, because now you have 16-year-old girls, twin girls at home with the father, who's a great dad. However, doesn't always understand what drama comes with teenage girls and stuff. But then we also had FaceTime and text, and by then they had phones. And so I found, as we chatted there the other day, Stephanie, it was a lot easier that time than it was the first time.
Right.
They weren't running down the street after me on Sunday night screaming, "Mommy, don't leave tonight." Like,
because they knew they could talk to you at any point at that point.
So, so then since we've been here in Ottawa, I came back from that, did a job, went to Jerusalem for a year in the Middle East, where we're doing supporting the Palestinians to help them with their security knowledge and ability to do their own security in the West Bank. Very challenging, a place where you can't drive, like it's a regular city, except that there's a knife attack 800 meters from where you're staying. And then you're not allowed to travel on the bus or the train because people ram people that are standing waiting for the train 200 meters from where we were staying. So challenges, like Alex said, about not talking about that. People knew where I was staying, and my mother kept trying to pin down what my street address was because we had a guy who ran down 3 people on Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, just up by the hotel from us. And then they chased him into the community and behind our hotel, and you could hear the automatic weapon fire and stuff. And so that weekend when I spoke to her, she's like, "What exactly is the street you're living on?" And you know, like, you try not to talk about that. "Oh, well, you know, it doesn't really have a street. You know how old cities are and stuff like that."
Right.
You know, but unfortunately the kids are smarter then, because they were at their first year university then. So they figure some stuff out. But been back here since then, and in command, which as any of you know, when you're in a job of responsibility, a lot more stuff keeps you at work later. A lot more stuff keeps you busy at night and on weekends. So you're not necessarily participating as much as you want to in some of the family things, or doing your share of the getting dinner ready and all that, or stuff like that, or you're distracted and stuff. So there's those challenges. And you know, I think we turned out all right. We're still all together. We're still all fairly happy. We have great kids. But I think that's because one of the benefits that we get from being in the military is our kids learn lots when they move. They learn resilience and self-reliant, and become self-reliant and independent. They learn about other cultures and history and all those different places they live and those people they interact with. But they also gain a village who helps raise them. So my kids' godparents are my 2 best friends. but I've had other friends at other locations who, been that person they chatted to when they had some funny story to share, and they let them talk to them, and they helped them when I wasn't home and they needed somebody to go to something with them and things like that. So I think that's one of those benefits we get out of being a military family, because they all are living it the same way as we are. So
Right.
they're more than happy to pick your kids up from basketball that night because you got to stay late for work and drive them home afterwards and things like that. So I think there's lots of challenges, but there's lots of benefits too that we get out.
I want to go back. First of all, we have some hellos from people watching. We have hellos from Trenton and Toronto and Renfrew and in Drayton Valley, and so we have a whole bunch of people watching. I have a whole bunch of questions coming in. One of the things that Alex mentioned, Alex, you talked about the fact that you had literally just been in an attack, and then a couple hours later were speaking to your family. What was it like having to keep information from your family to sort of did that make you feel more isolated from them? Did you feel like you had a barrier between you and your family? Or was it just more of you trying to protect them? How did that impact your relationship?
No, it was just part of being a soldier. It was just a professional necessity, I think.
Is that something that the three of you have find this consensus that you just sort of had to keep a lot of information to yourselves while you were in theater?
Yeah, I mean, we were the first generation of soldiers who've been able to do that, right? That there's no soldiers in history who were able to call home literally from the battlefield. That was a coincidence of time and place. I mean, I think that could kind of lead to the sort of pornographication of military activity, right? There's a certain, people have studied this kind of thing, that once you detach the act of violence and you start putting sort of barriers between it, the easier the act of killing becomes. And I'm not saying that the families back home would suddenly get engaged in the act of violence, but yeah, I think it's just being professional, that you don't talk about it till you go home. And even then, a lot of that stuff's not appropriate for dinner table conversation ever, to be honest. I mean, there's a reason those guys came back in 1918 and 1945 and never talked about it, because it wasn't appropriate. The reason they did it is so you don't have to hear about it.
Mm-hmm. How, and this can go to any of you, Alex, with your parents, and then subsequently your son and your partner, Angela with your daughters and your husband, and Bruce with your wife and your kids. How do you think your time, time in service, time being away deployed, time away from home in general, what do you think was the long-term impact on your family? What are the kinds of pressures that they had to endure? And I know, Angela, you touched a little bit on that, but what are some of the pressures that they had to endure during that time? And did you notice a change at the various stages of your career, whether it be more technology was available to you, whether it be your kids were older, whether it be, Alex, in your case, you were not a father and then all of a sudden you were a father? How did what were the types of pressures, and what did your family have, sort of, what was their experience? Because I've always heard it from the family perspective. I'd be very curious to hear it from the actual serving member perspective, and I'll leave it out to any one of you to start.
If I could maybe just finish briefly, I think I came back a giant dick every time, to be honest. And I, apologize for the use of language. I just couldn't find a better term.
I'm drinking wine, so you go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I was the boss every time. So I was always, a war chieftain. And I come back and, there's two challenges going on there at once. And one is the particular challenges that operations put on the psyche of somebody, and then the requirements to engage back in sort of normal society. And then the fact that you're really not that important anymore. If you were to begin with, I'm sure my guys would be, quick to jump on and assure everybody that I wasn't very important. But and I would agree with that, but you go from having this enormous power, quite frankly, over life and death. So you got to line up for your driver's license like everybody else. And as it should be, yeah, you do have to reintegrate. But my partner at the time now, I mean, that's a long time ago. It's 10 to 15 to almost 20 years ago from my 4 tours. I can say unequivocally, I wasn't a very pleasant person when I came back each time, for sure. And I think that accumulated. So by the time I came back from the 4th tour, I was extremely unpleasant, for sure.
Okay. Angela?
I remember that from when my dad was deployed, or just went on a long course because he commissioned, and so then he became an officer and had to go on a 13-week course. And I remember being the kid at home. I was a teenager by then, so you start to notice stuff more, and you're like, we're all kind of walking on eggshells because now he wants to tell us how to do stuff different than what we were doing before he got home. And he's a pretty laid back, easygoing guy, but still you notice that difference. So I hope I was better at it by being more aware of it. But I think along the same lines as Alex says, you're used to being in charge and you're used to telling people what to do. And sure, you do that as a parent in a home, but you can't do that with your spouse. And it doesn't really come off very well. And I remember actually talking to my junior officers when they had new babies and saying to them, first rule as an officer, you got to remember, people are used to following your orders. Children, they don't like to do that. So, they're not going to sleep when you want to, and they're not going to be quiet when you want to, and all that kind of stuff when they're babies. But it's the same throughout their lives. Just because you say it as the parent, you don't have any more power over them that way than as the officer or the military member. Just because you're now home, you need to kind of figure out where your space is, and it's harder to do when you're not as in contact. Like I found the time in Afghanistan was difficult, as well as the year in Toronto when they were younger, because you weren't aware of everything that's going on and how the dynamic had shifted while you were gone. A little easier when you were FaceTiming, WhatsApp, and doing that kind of stuff, because then you were a little more engaged in the home front and stuff like that. But still, you had to step back and let the spouse make the decisions and try not to intercede and say, hey, you should be doing this. And then he would say stuff like, hey, you're not here. Like, you don't have to deal with the problem of getting them out the door or doing that stuff. Just let me do it, and I'll let you know if I need any help. Like, okay, you have to back off.
And Bruce, what kind of, and what's so interesting is that it's very redundant with what I've heard from the other side, that reintegration piece of somebody coming back into the home and kind of relearning their role and how to re-interact with people is equally difficult for the family members as it is for the serving member. Bruce, what's your take on this? Just
that, I would live, you'd live for the warning order. You would live to be told you're going. You live for, you can't measure, there's certain jobs and certain trades in the Canadian Armed Forces that when they go to work every day, it matters because it's in real time. So if I work on airframe, it doesn't matter if I'm deployed overseas or I'm deployed domestically, the impact of my job is such that it has an impact on people. The job that I did in the infantry, if I'm deployed to Wainwright and I'm practicing, if I do something wrong, I get to do it again. And I've already watched it probably 100 times before I'm ever put in a position to lead anyway. But after practicing for so long, you want to deploy because you want to go and you want to find out about yourself and you want to find out if this works. And it becomes very singular at that point where my family, as it developed, when the warning orders would come in and they give you the heads up that you're getting ready to go, you're leaving in 8 months, a year, 6 months, whatever the timeline might be, that's when that home clock starts ticking because you're already gone. Your mindset is already on mission. And the extra training time you do, you're deployed before mission to do your mission specific training. You come home for a short stint and off you go, but your family's already living there. They're already living with you gone because they know you're leaving and they've seen it before. And it is, I love the word that Alex used, selfish. Absolutely. But such is the nature of the job. I mean, nobody in the Canadian Armed Forces asked me to join. Nobody asked me to stay. I made those decisions. I loved what I did, but to be able to deploy and find out and figure it out and be part of this, you couldn't do that here. I couldn't do my trade in Canada. I had to go somewhere else. And I lived to go somewhere else, and I wanted to go somewhere else. And every opportunity I had to go somewhere else, I took full advantage of it. The hardest thing about this weekend, and has been since I've retired, other than the first maybe 3 years, was to look back and see, man, what a heavy toll that plays out, because it was singular. It was putting yourself in front of all of it. Because not because you didn't want to be loving or be supportive or be there for them, but because you get so engaged with what you're doing and it becomes so ensconced in you. Like after 25 years, you're institutionalized. I can't imagine after 30. I can't imagine after 35. But it doesn't wear off. It doesn't wash off. You don't take it off one day and then all of a sudden it's not there, because it's instilled in you after a while. Mm-hmm. So I think the hardest part on that was looking back and seeing what a great job that Kim had done over the years. The fact that our marriage survived as long as it had, it ultimately didn't, that she did such a great job on it and allowed me to focus on what I needed to focus on when I was doing those things that I thought I had to do.
So if you were to speak to individuals who are serving now, you've had years and years of experience, what would be some advice to the serving members or to the families, knowing what you do know now, in terms of that family relationship, not necessarily about a serving member to serving member, but keeping that family context in mind? What would you tell them, knowing what you know now?
I think there's a pretty progressive program that was set up called the Joint Speakers Bureau. It evolved into the R2MR program, Road to Mental Readiness program. Colonel Suzanne Bailey was the head of it for a number of years. She did an amazing job. She had a lot of dedicated clinicians, and what they did was they tied up clinicians with vets, people that had served already, and they would deliver messages throughout people's careers, pre-deployment, post-deployment, and they message it, and they've encapsulated it, and they get the feedback from the members. What works, what doesn't. That stuff's available through the MFRC. That stuff's available online for people that want to engage in that. And as serving members, it's introduced to you throughout your career. So you start in St. Jean, you get it in St. Jean. You go on your trades training, you get it there. I think my biggest thing is there was always a pushback when the word mental health was involved. But there's some great stuff in the programs that are available for the families, mission specific, things to think about. So when we're talking redeployment just now, most of the stuff that was just talked about is actually in those packages. Just slow reintegration. The whole, that's exactly what I would have done story. When you get that phone call and this happened, so what did you do? This is what I did. Well, that's exactly what I would have done. Yeah, but then this happened. So what did you do? Well, this is what I did. Well, that's exactly what I would have done. It doesn't matter at the end of the day what the story is. It's the support piece from us. It goes back and says, you did the best you could do while I was away doing what I do. And for that, love and support. So I just say, pay attention to what's out there.
It's more recognition to what they were going through at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Whether you agree with it or not, just be supportive, because Lord knows they're supportive of us.
Good. Alex and Angela, what might you do knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was kind of generally dismissive of the concerns of the home front. I mean, I think I understood it in a general intellectual way, but it certainly wouldn't have been on a deeper level. I mean, if I were to try flip it around, like the Colonel just described, like if I were a spouse and my spouse kept taking off for this really dangerous thing, but thing they also really, really liked, like, let's be honest, and I certainly would try to be more respectful of that. Now, I think now I'm 10 years removed from my last tour. I think the value of routine and respecting that routine Like when the member comes back, they're the one that has to integrate to that routine, not the other way around. I did not adhere to that particular way of doing business, but I should have, for sure.
Antoine.
And I think we'd add, if I was talking to families, ask for help if you need it.
Yeah.
Got a network available to you, whether that be a network that comes with the unit, the regiment, ship, company, but now we have MFRCs that have loads of services available to people that were not there before. And the stigma of mental health is not there as it was, a decade ago. So not just the stigma of mental health for the serving member who may be coming home with challenges that need to be addressed and maybe unwilling to take action on that, but also the family that's had to deal with, the concern about that member dying, being killed while they're deployed and things like that, or just being overwhelmed with all of the things they're having to deal with. Inevitably a car breaks and a furnace dies and the roof leaks and all of that in everybody's deployment. None of that goes as simply as it's supposed to. And so, but just like we are get it done type people, our spouses and families are get it done type people too, with a tendency to just push through and get it done. But I would encourage them to seek out help, because loads of people are out there ready to help, but they don't want to interfere and force themselves on you. They just need some indication that you need a bit of a hand. And I think that comes to us too, is to keep an eye on people better and say, hey, let's include them in this event because someone's away, or have someone checking on them, swinging by, taking them for coffee, bringing them a coffee, or inviting them out, or inviting their kids over for a play date and things like that, to give them a break to go run some errands or things like that. It's our whole community, but I think we're better at it now than we were years ago. Years ago it was very informal back when I was a kid, but now because of our tempo and because of the risk we're putting people to when they go away on deployments now, it's even more important that we're doing it with that kind of support network to help people, and people should take advantage of it.
I have a question here from someone named Lindsay who's watching, and she says, what can Canadians do to better support active members, vets, and families on their military journey? So what do you think that civilians, and actually I'm gonna preface it in two parts. Number one, do you think that, having been retired sometime to Alex and to Bruce, and coming up on your retirement, Angela, number one, do you think that civilians know about the sacrifices that the CAF members and their families make? And number two, what might those civilians do to help with the military family journey and help make that easier?
I don't think they have an appreciation for what we do, because we tend to be make it happen type people, and we tend to keep things to ourselves. So we share amongst ourselves, and even then that's difficult. But I don't think we share with the civilians. So they respect what we do. They appreciate that. They thank us on Remembrance Day and things like that. But I don't think they have an appreciation for the sacrifices that members make, nor that the families make. I'm not sure exactly what they can do better, because obviously being supportive of programs that support military families is key, I think. So whether it's charities that help military families, or activities that in your community that can help military families, I don't think we as the members need so much the support as the families do. And just understanding the situation better. So when my kids went to school in Germany, we were at an American military school on the base, and 900 kids in grades 3, 4, and 5. But that was a fully military school. Everybody, parents.
Oh, wow.
Everybody had a parent that was in the military. It's a base of 20,000 people. So everybody there had a parent who was in the military, or two, and everybody's class had 2 or 3 minimum deployed at a time. in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other places. And so the teachers had a better sense of what was going on and could see when things were affecting the kids. They had activities in the school, after deployment, after school things for kids who were from deployed families to go and maybe do some other things with other kids in a similar situation, and eventually maybe have a chat with a kid who's having the same problem. I don't see that at our schools because we're such a small number in a large population. And we don't want to be stigmatized by it, but those challenges are different. And I think they're also the challenges faced by other first responders, police, EMT, people who are working in oil, they're away all the time too. The challenges are different because the danger might not be there, but families are facing that.
I like that you touched on maybe like something in the curriculum, that teachers need to be aware, because that's one thing that we hear a lot is that, it's rare that you have children move from school to school and for them to be in a school that is full of military children. So there's a sense of isolation and this feeling that they sort of can't ever get caught up. And if the teachers were more well equipped perhaps to deal with that and understood some of the challenges that the kids were going through, that's an interesting thought. Bruce or Alex, where do you feel civilians sit in this in terms of their appreciation for what the CAF does and for what the military families go through?
I don't know. I think it's the gift of democracy that you don't have to worry about your military and your military families. That's kind of the benefit. I mean, the Colonel touched on this, Angela touched on this, the idea that we're not the only people who go away and leave families for long periods of time. I was gone far more in the oil patch than I ever was in the Army. And in fact, sometimes the dangers were quite comparable. I think by the time the 2010 decade ended here in Alberta, there have been more industrial deaths in Alberta than had died in Afghanistan. So we're not alone in the challenges of people disappearing off for long periods of time and then being in some kind of danger. So I think there's already a tremendous amount of support. I didn't know what a Canadian soldier looked like when I was a kid. It was hard to join the Army because I didn't even know what it looked like or where to find it. And that's not the case anymore. So there's much better exposure than there used to be. I think the military itself constantly says it's interested in families, and I've been out for a while now, but I kept getting posted at the end of one of my tours. That happened every time. And I would be dealing with the misery of traumatic brain injury at the same time I was trying to sell a house and buy a new one. I don't know if that's changed, but I'm a little suspicious that sort of thing has changed substantially. That would be really the Canadian military putting rubber to the road when it comes to supporting military families.
Right.
But I've been out for a while, so maybe those kinds of things have improved.
Right. Yeah, we have a purse temple thing now that prevents people from being posted in a certain period of time post return from a deployment, minimum 6 months, preferably a year. But I just had a master corporal come into my year who came home from a deployment and ended up doing Whole Lake to Ottawa, and it's unusual, but it still happens because of operational requirements.
That's the caveat.
Yeah, that's the challenge. And in the end, his family stayed in Cold Lake because he couldn't sell his house in such a short notice move. But then he ends up in Ottawa, and 6 months later in a pandemic, and now he can't travel to Cold Lake to see the family, and that adds other challenges to his life. Eventually, once things started to restrict a little less, we got the chance to send him home, but that adds a lot more challenges to the family.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being posted from Edmonton to Ottawa after my fourth and final tour, and I was told it was for operational requirements, but it was so I could carry a general's luggage in Ottawa. Like, there's no operational requirement there. Yeah. So I showed the forces I became a lawyer on their dime. Like, that was my reaction to that. Like, see you later. And until those sorts of things change, and maybe they're starting to, I'm a little I think we get treated really well by Canadians, and we did when I was in. But I'm a little more suspicious of the organization in that respect.
So before we end, sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
Sorry, Steph, just to go back to your question for a second, though, I really think the Canadians rally around the military when it's time to do so.
When it's go time.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, I got a couple of times from our brothers when I was on the bridges and met nothing but civilians that had no attachment to the military, didn't know anybody in the military, that simply were up there to show their love and support. I've met people on the street that have seen me wearing a jacket or my hat or whatever and thanked me for my service. And I think the vet world and the military world, if we want engagement, we don't have to wait for Canadians to come to us. We certainly can reach out to them as well. And you've never seen so many active vets and active organizations ever as we do right now. I'm in the vet space. There's an armful of organizations that I can name off the top of my head that do nothing but try to do interaction, get people involved, and get our messaging out there that, you know what, there's a lot of good people that serve and a lot of good people that did serve. I think we can be very engaged.
I want to ask, just coming back to Military Family Appreciation Day, what role do you think why is it so important for a military family to be resilient and that there be support for the family? How does that impact the serving member?
I think if I could jump in, I remember participating in electronic war games in Ottawa that were like big power war games, like if we fought World War III. And there were two takeaways that I learned from those. And people in the Air Force and Navy do this stuff all the time, but as an infantry officer, I had very little exposure to that stuff. But there were two takeaways I got from those exercises. One is, if we fight that kind of war again, the world doesn't stand much of a chance of lasting. Second of all, it'll be extremely short because we're all going to run out of stuff really, really quickly. But we have to be prepared one day, I think, and I hope not, that the next conflict we fight is going to be awful. And I don't know what level of resiliency we're going to require to endure that. Adjusted for population, our death rate in the Great War would equal 250,000 people today. And we lost all that in about 3.5 years. So would we be willing to endure something like that again? I'm not sure, and maybe we shouldn't. But I know, working at kind of the information operations level on one of my tours, the enemy knew that our vulnerability was in fact at home. And they knew that strategically, all they had to do was make the cover of the Globe and Mail with a dead teenager on the front. And those families were extremely, extremely tough when they needed to be. And that's why we didn't pack it in until the government mandate ended in 2011 when we left Southern Afghanistan. Like, that resiliency has to do with our strategic ability to wage war again one day. And if our enemies know that we're weak on that home front, that's where we'll suffer again next time. As it turned out, our families were much, much tougher than the enemy expected. And to be honest, maybe what most Canadians expected. So I would offer from that perspective that kind of resilience, like, our vulnerability as a nation is in fact back here at home. And the next time we have to exchange lethal effects with somebody, that's going to be key.
Okay. How do we build that resiliency? How do we continue to do that? If you're saying that's a big vulnerability of ours and that we do in fact need resiliency back at home, how can Together We Stand help? How can civilians help? What are some supports that are needed there? What does that resilient family look like?
Well, I think Bruce and Angela both touched on about how sort of resilient their own families have been while they were deployed. I think, and I'd be interested for their input, but I think honesty in what we do, I made it pretty clear that I was an infantry officer and that's what I did. And that came with inherent risks. I think a certain honesty is required. I think that's necessary and inevitable in any functioning relationship. I think it also requires our government to properly treat the forces as an element for using lethal effects on the nation's enemies. We're not, yeah, we can help out with floods and fires from time to time, but that's not what we exist for.
Absolutely.
You have to be prepared for that day when our own young people come back in boxes, or quite frankly, we put the enemy's people in boxes. And that has to be a necessity, because if we don't have that honesty with what the existence of the Canadian Armed Forces is for, then I don't think we'll have that kind of resiliency.
Do you think that, before I go there, I want to hear from Angela and Bruce in terms of how can we make families more resilient, and what part do they play if they are a resilient family in the success of our CAF?
I would add really, really quickly, when I was a unit adjutant, I saw nothing but resiliency from families. And to be honest, I don't know where it came from. I saw all kinds of, very young spouses who come from Quebec and didn't speak English, older military spouses, and I saw nothing but resiliency. I don't know the secret sauce, though. I
don't think we can serve without our families. Personally, I mean, certainly there's lots of single members, but they still have families. They have parents, they have siblings, they have those people who are giving them support, cheering them on or helping them out when they need to. And I think that's key to our success is our families in the end. But I think part of giving them the resilience is listening to them, letting them be part of the solution, talking about programs that they need, what they see as the gaps, because I don't have the same problems as you or you or you or you. So, we have MFRCs, and back when I was a captain, I was the wing commander's rep on the first MFRC we had at Shearwater. I was on the board for 3 years. I had no children at the time, but I believed that it was important to have a program and a community that would help each other. And, as my most recent job as the base commander, the MFRC is supporting my families out there. But in all of my deployments, I didn't use the MFRC that much because I had a strong friend network and a strong family network. So I didn't need it as much, but it didn't mean it wasn't helping somebody else who is deployed or even at home. Whether that support be for children with special needs or people dealing with aging parents or helping spouses find jobs or doctors when they move and things like that. So I think we have to create programs that the family feels they need, and so we need to be listening to them. I think we do better at listening to them now than we did years ago. We just figured this was the solution and this fit everybody's problems, and here's the square peg in the round hole. I think we're better at listening to them now, and I think we just have to continue to do that. And so the MFRCs that are in every base and wing have to be tailored to that community. Different communities have different needs. Whether language training is an issue at your community or it's not, it may be at somebody else's, whether spousal employment or getting doctors are different or challenges. I think we just need to be open to allow them to adjust to their needs, and then be engaged to give them the support that they need to adjust to allow those programs to be what they need.
Yeah. And Bruce, what's your take on it?
It's just a couple of things. I think there's when you put your uniform on and you decide that you're going to serve your country, and for whatever the reason you decided to join is, I mean, that's your own, but the uniform instills certain characteristics in you. And this country, Canada, has certain characteristics that are common. I think I've traveled most of the country. I've stayed in most of the country. I've got friends from around the country, and the Canadian spirit. It is a resilient country. It's a resilient group of people. That when you add the pride piece and the uniform to it, and you're a serving member, that also has a positive effect on the family. And it's not like it's all sunshine and roses at home. My wife at the time did not like the Canadian Armed Forces. She's not a fan at all. She several times wanted me to do something other than, but that wasn't happening. That wasn't going to happen. And again, thinking back on you look back on time and maybe things could have been different, kind of thing. But their resilience, I think, just comes from that. It's what's the option? What is what?
Move forward.
Yeah, that's it. You can tread water. You can get closer to shore. Which one are you going to pick?
Yeah.
So if you're going to serve, thankfully we have gotten better at acknowledging the family. There was once upon a time, if the Canadian Armed Forces wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one.
Mhm.
But we've progressed from there. We're better than that now, and we understand the significance and the importance of the home piece, of those people standing on our corner and supporting us. I mean, what's greater than being away and getting 6 boxes of craft dinner show up in the mail, right? It means a lot to them to send it. It means a lot to me to get it. Is it about the craft dinner? No, it's really just about the love in a box that's being sent from home, and that's them doing their piece there while we do our piece there.
Well, I could speak to all three of you all night, frankly, because I find each of your stories and your opinions and your perspectives so fascinating. I have taken up an entire hour, so I thank you all for offering us a very unique and flip side of the perspective of the serving member of how you felt the family was impacted and what you might have been going through while your family was impacted. So I thank you so much. I thank everybody for watching again tonight. I want to remind you all to continue to participate in our Home Fort Challenge. I have shouts out to Toronto, to Trenton, to Drayton Valley, to Shearwater, to Medicine Hat, to Petawawa, to Mayfield, to Saskatchewan, to Cold Lake, to Elphin, and is there anything that you want to say to your own families before we leave tonight?
Thanks. I love you. Couldn't have done it without any of them, for sure.
Oh, we lost Bruce. I'm not sure where he went.
Low battery.
Uh-oh. Well, Bruce, you want to give your family a shout out?
Something I wanted to say all night, and it's going to happen right now. I'm back. Oh. Thank you very much for having us, Stephanie. Thank you very much. Alex, Angela, very nice to meet you tonight.
Yeah, you too, Bruce.
And Alex, any parting words?
As soon as I had my son, I'm like, oh my God. Like, I cannot believe what I did to my parents. That must have been about 30 seconds after he came out.
But they're parents, so they forgive you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I so appreciated and enjoyed tonight and enjoyed listening to your perspectives. So thank you. It was a privilege to speak with all of you. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get you back on here one day.
Thank you so much for everything the foundation is doing for us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.